when you're able to compare how revenue has been raised in Kenya since 2013 until last year, 2024, I want us to look at how the data looks for us to be able to ask ourselves whether this very strong commitment that we saw here earlier is really what is happening in real time. Now, when you look at the Division of Revenue Act of 2013 and the numbers that you see in the Division of Revenue Act of 2024, you will see notable progress in terms of the absolute numbers. For instance, total shareable revenue has increased by 220% from 920 billion in 2013 to 2.948 trillion in 2024, a 220% increase in total shareable revenue. How much of this is going to counties vis-a-vis the national government? National government's share has equally increased by 248% from 730 billion in 2013 to 2.54 trillion in 2024. When you look at cumulative spending, in total, between 2013 and 2024, we spent about 27 trillion Kenyan shillings. You may want to know how the spending patterns compares between the national government and county governments. Out of the 27 trillion, 23.4 trillion was spent by the national government, and that accounts for 87% of expenditure. 3.6 trillion was spent by county governments, accounting for only 13% of national expenditure. Now, that same trend continues when you trickle that down to looking at specific ministries and specific sectors that are either wholly devolved or substantially devolved.
Looking at that also, on the other hand, really it is going to be very important, and it is related to the third question, which is about clarifying the critical place of inclusive partnerships and so forth. It's really that we got to get the sector forums working, the sector consultative forums. I know Bajeti Hub, you called it sector working groups. Let's not confuse those with the sector working groups under the National Treasury, which of course has to do with the overall budget. But there are sector consultative forums which are supposed to happen for every sector under Intergovernmental Relations Act. Those have not been working the way they should be working. And those are the forums where the two levels of government should meet with all other stakeholders. And I say with those other stakeholders, including the civil society, to represent the voice of the people, because again, we need organized voice from the citizens. And that is where the civil societies come in.
There's this whole governance of how resources are distributed. There's been a lot that Gishana has talked about, in terms of the numbers. And Kedenji has talked about in terms of now everybody knows what they are supposed to do. And you've been following and tracking all the formulas that have been developed over the four of them, including the fourth one, that is neither here nor there. And also some of the reforms that the Commission on Revenue Allocation, it's unfortunate they are not present in the room today. What's your take, and how do you see that space, and where do you think we should actually be pushing this conversation?
One of the things that has happened a lot with these iterations of how we share revenue is they've become events, right? So it's events that after every 5 years, we'll have this big moment where we'll sit down and talk about the formula. There'll be a lot of haggling. There'll be a lot of, I think in 2020, all of us might remember the big fights in the Senate, where now every senator was coming up with their own formula. So it's become an event, rather than thinking of them in a very progressive, continuous way of how do we make sure we are constantly having a discussion on how are we sharing revenue, how can we improve it, how do we make sure we have a picture from the counties on how they are experiencing the processes of how they receive the revenue. Is it able to meet the goals of the functions they have to deliver on? So one of the things we really have to think through is how do we make the process of revenue sharing, something that is continuous and create a process that brings more people on board.
Devolution, I believe, was not an end to itself. It was something that was supposed to provide an opportunity to the end. So when we talk about the objects, what it was coming to solve or make better, then we have how they were intended to be made better. Some of the things was because devolution is ideally a social contract between the citizens and duty bearers, right? So as we speak about it from that point, it meant that citizens had to be at the center. And even at TISA, what we do with our work over the years in devolution is always to ensure that people are the ones who are pushing for change, the ones we currently call grassroots. Out there, wanaitwa mama mboga and boda boda. But here for today, for the purpose of arms, lazima tuwaite grassroots. So as I speak to that, I am also reminded that when we say citizens have to be at the center, it means that when Oliver Waindi was speaking in the morning and talking about civic education, people must be given the opportunity to know what is entitled, they are entitled to.
If we do not have an institution that is actively holding these several actors within the devolved government to account, then we will be having certain missing gaps. So can we address, especially as the CSOs, how we can also come in and hold these particular persons accountable?
And so maybe there is need for us to begin to think about a shift of mindset. And when I'm talking about a shift of mindset, for example, one of the panelists was talking about how we can begin to think about increasing county revenues. And of course, he was talking about introducing new products, for example. But for me, I'm coming from the point of view that we are always very quick at prescribing solutions as opposed to looking at the big picture and understanding the problems. And so instead of asking the questions, can introducing new products to increase revenues, we need to begin to ask, what are these systemic conditions that are holding the issue of revenue being a problem?
Our counties, in essence, can grow to become very strong states within our own government and our own nation. If only we have very clear mechanisms and structures for service and impact delivery, number one. Number two, if it's also very clear that those bestowed with the responsibility to lead us in development become accountable. I like what the young man has said here, accountability. But what are the mechanisms for accountability for us? When leaders have failed to be accountable in their service delivery, what are the measures to be taken against them? So for me, I think my cry would be, we need very clear mechanism for checking and accountability and instilling a sense of pride to deliver to the people.
If you traveled across the country, there was very little to be seen. But now, I was sharing with the DG of Kirinyaga. If you go to Kirinyaga now, Kirogoya, you can see the emergence of a CBD there, kind of a mini city. A good example is here in Homa Bay. Used to come here in the budget committee when I was in National Assembly, devolution are not taken off. And Homa Bay was little more than just a small little town, no roads, tin roof houses. Now it's becoming another very beautiful city with, and a lot of potential. Same case can be said of Kitui. Same case can be said of Bungoma. It's absolutely amazing. So devolution is a revolution. There will always be a question as to whether we over-devolved, whether we should have had lesser counties, maybe 14 or 16, for their own economic viability.
We've worked with the Council of Governors, the State Department for Devolution, with a partnership with the World Bank, to try and look at practices specifically across all the 47 counties and have conversations with those responsible with public participation in the counties, together with civil society organizations. The biggest gap that came out was the feedback loop gap on how do you know what decision was taken, because citizens, through their voice gave certain suggestions that were to be taken up. So a lot of very interesting, good practices actually came up from some counties. I was just listing down Kwale and Wajir as 2 examples I remember, where they've started preparing public participation reports, and these reports actually try and close that feedback loop. And so in these guidelines, and I'm hoping that they will be made of use very soon, those are some of the key areas that have gone into those guidelines, thinking through how do you learn from practice of the counties that are already doing it.
That devolution is a joint national project. It is not a county's project. And for a very long time, we've looked at devolution as a county's project. And therefore, whenever we do something to facilitate devolution, we feel like we should be congratulated and be told you've done a fantastic job, and therefore you've done us a favor as counties. That's where we went wrong. That's why we don't have sufficient support from the national government, because maybe the problem arose during the transition period, where we needed to assert the power and the place of devolution in the Kenya's new constitutional dispensation, that we pushed the national government away and they became disinterested and indifferent. Now we get to a point where they look at devolution as that is a county's project. It is not. We need to be able to reinitiate conversations, both in our intergovernmental relations fora and various other forums, to be able to bring back national government or national governance institutions to the table, and on the understanding that this is a joint project that needs to be nurtured by both levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Help me appreciate our panelists.